Hi, my name is Madison, and I'm 30 years old. If you had met me a year ago, you might have thought I had everything together. I worked as a makeup artist, doing bridal looks and studio shoots from a small home salon I had put together myself. I wasn't rich, but I had pride in what I built. What people didn't see behind the brushes and blush was the stress, the kind that kept me awake at night wondering if I could make rent or pay off my student loans on time. But the one person who always seemed to believe in me was my grandfather, William. Grandpa William had always been the quiet force in our family. After my grandmother passed away years ago, he remained in our lives as this calm, composed man with sharp eyes and a warm heart. He had built a respectable fortune from real estate long before I was born and had always been wise with money. While my parents, Brenda and Richard, lived a normal middle-class life, Grandpa lived in a beautiful brick house in a quiet upscale neighborhood, surrounded by the roses he personally cared for. Despite the love in our family, there had always been this tension. Subtle, but present. My mom would sometimes roll her eyes when Grandpa spoke, and my dad would become unusually silent in his presence. I didn't think much of it growing up. I figured all families had their weird dynamics. When I told my parents I wanted to pursue a career in makeup instead of becoming a teacher like they had hoped, they didn't hold back their disappointment. "It's not a real career," my mom had said, arms crossed. "It's unstable. Who's going to pay you to play with lipstick?" But I pushed ahead anyway, slowly building a list of clients through social media and local referrals. Then came the slowdown. A major client canceled 6 bookings in a row. I found myself watching my savings evaporate. I started skipping meals to save grocery money and charging essentials on a credit card I couldn't pay off. But I didn't tell my parents. I couldn't handle the "we told you so" lecture again. I told no one, except Grandpa William. I went to see him one afternoon under the pretense of dropping off cookies. He saw right through me. "Sit down, sweetheart," he said, his voice low and patient. "Tell me what's really going on." I broke down, tears running over my highlighter-smudged cheeks, and admitted that I was barely staying afloat. That very day, he made a promise. "I'll help you until you're back on your feet, $3,000 a month, no questions asked. That's what family is for." I protested at first, but he was firm. I left his house that day with a hug, a check, and a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't even imagine, was that I would never see a single dollar of that money. And the reason why? It was sitting comfortably in someone else's hands. 3 weeks after Grandpa William promised to support me, we were invited to one of our usual family dinners at my parents' home. These dinners were supposed to be casual and familiar, just me, my parents, my older brother Kevin, my younger sister Bella, and whoever decided to show up. But something about that evening felt different. The first thing I noticed was my dad's car. He used to drive an old silver sedan that rattled when it reversed. But parked in the driveway that night was a brand new luxury SUV, shiny, spotless, and definitely expensive. Inside the house, it was like walking into a home makeover show. The walls were repainted in rich, warm tones. The living room furniture had been replaced with plush leather couches. And the kitchen. Oh, the kitchen. Marble countertops, brand new appliances with glowing LED displays, and a crystal chandelier over the dining table. It looked like something out of a magazine. I blinked, trying to hide my surprise. My parents were a high school administrator and an insurance claims manager. Solid jobs, sure, but this type of renovation didn't match their usual cautious spending. Just a year ago, they were still using dial-up internet. Now, they had a smart refrigerator. "Wow," I said, forcing a smile. "You've really updated the place." My mom, Brenda, beamed with pride. "It was time for a little upgrade," she said, smoothing out the fresh table runner. "We deserve it after everything, don't we?" My dad, Richard, nodded quickly. "Got a great financing deal on the car too. 0% interest." It all sounded so casual. Too casual. I sipped the wine they offered, definitely imported, and tried to shake off the unease building in my stomach. Kevin arrived next, looking tired, with his tie loosened and his expression guarded. He barely said a word as he poured himself a double shot of whiskey and downed it before even taking off his coat. Bella came last, dressed nicely but distracted, fingers glued to her phone screen. She greeted everyone half-heartedly and settled into her seat like she was bracing for something. There was tension in the air, thick, silent, and strange. Brenda kept going in and out of the kitchen, checking the oven like it might explode. Richard couldn't sit still, wiping invisible dust from placemats. Kevin asked no questions. Bella checked her phone under the table every 30 seconds. When I asked Kevin if he was okay, he muttered, "Just tired," and poured himself another drink. Bella, when questioned, claimed she was dealing with school projects, despite being on break. By the time we sat down at the table, it felt like I was dining with strangers. The table was set like a banquet: prime rib, truffle mashed potatoes, baked rolls, sparkling wine, and even a flaming dessert waiting in the kitchen. I wanted to ask the obvious: how are you affording all of this? But I kept quiet. Then, at exactly 6 p.m., the doorbell rang. "Right on time," Richard muttered, wiping his palms on his pants. He stood and opened the door. In walked Grandpa William, dressed in a navy blazer, his silver hair neatly brushed back, and a look of quiet command in his eyes. "Everyone behave," Brenda hissed. "And no one mentioned the renovations." I didn't know it then, but that dinner would change everything I thought I knew about my family. Dinner began like any other: tight smiles, small talk, and the clinking of silverware against expensive plates. Grandpa William sat at the head of the table, directly opposite my father Richard, like two captains at a silent standoff. My mother Brenda played hostess, overly cheerful, making sure everyone's plate was full and their wine glasses never empty. But beneath the surface, something was off. Brenda's hands trembled slightly every time she reached for a serving spoon. Richard barely made eye contact with Grandpa. Kevin downed his third drink before the roast beef was even served, and Bella stared so hard at her phone it was a miracle she didn't burn holes through it. I sat there quietly, absorbing it all. Grandpa William made polite conversation for a while, asked Kevin about work, asked Bella about her economics program, gave a nod of approval to the truffle mashed potatoes. But even as he spoke, I could tell he was observing everything. His eyes missed nothing. I knew that look. It was the same look he gave contractors who tried to cheat him during property deals. Then his gaze turned to me. "And Madison," he said, setting down his knife and folding his hands neatly on the table. "How's business? Have things improved since we last spoke?" I straightened in my chair, heart skipping. I hadn't spoken to him in person since that afternoon when I broke down in his study. "It's slowly getting better," I said honestly. "I'm still rebuilding, but I've picked up a few bridal contracts. It's not much, but it's progress." He smiled gently. "That's good. And the money I've been sending? Is the $3,000 a month covering your basic needs for now?" The room fell into dead silence. The fork froze mid-air in my hand. Kevin's glass stopped inches from his lips. Bella looked up from her phone, blinking like she'd just woken from a trance. I stared at Grandpa. "What money?" I asked. His smile vanished. Slowly, he turned to Brenda. "The $3,000 I've been transferring every month for the past 5 years into the account you told me was Madison's emergency fund." My mother's face lost all color. "Oh, there's been a misunderstanding," she said too quickly. "It's not what you think, Dad. We were just what?" William interrupted, his voice calm but cutting. "Because my bank statements show $3,000 per month for 60 months. That's $180,000 meant for Madison. And you told me she needed help after a medical diagnosis. Some chronic condition." My eyes widened. "Medical condition? I'm perfectly healthy." Richard finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "William, we can explain." Kevin slammed his glass down. "Explain what? That you stole money meant for Madison? While she was drowning in bills and eating cereal for dinner?" Brenda's face crumpled, then hardened. "She's always been your favorite. She got the attention, the gifts, the praise. Why shouldn't we get something in return?" I stared at her in disbelief. "So you took money meant for me? Money that could have saved me from debt, and you spent it on a remodeled kitchen and a new SUV? We're your parents. Brenda cried. We've supported you your whole life. Raising children isn't cheap. Grandpa William leaned forward, eyes sharp. You lied. You created a fake illness, redirected financial support, and now you justify it by calling it parenting. There was no excuse left. Just silence. Heavy, shattering silence. I looked around the table, at the faces I had loved my whole life, and realized they had watched me struggle, listened to me cry, and let me believe I was alone, while they lived off money that wasn't theirs. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. 5 years. $180,000.
Gone.
I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was shrinking around me, every corner pressing inward as I tried to process what I had just heard. 5 years of financial strain. 5 years of stress, ramen dinners, sleepless nights, and overdue bills, all while my parents had been quietly funneling $3,000 a month meant for me into their own pockets. You have no idea what it's like, Brenda snapped, breaking the silence. Always being compared to William. Always being told we weren't doing enough. You think we did this out of greed? We did it to survive in a world that's never been fair to us. I stood up from the table slowly, my hands trembling. You didn't do this to survive. You did it to upgrade your backsplash and drive a luxury SUV while I was rationing shampoo. Richard's face was pale. We thought we could fix it before you found out. We were waiting for the right time to tell you. The right time. I laughed bitterly. You had 60 months to tell me. Kevin leaned forward, his eyes dark. Is that what happened to my house down payment too? When Grandpa offered to help and the bank denied my loan a week later. Did that money vanish into granite countertops too? Brenda looked like a trapped animal. We needed to keep the house running. And what about me? Bella asked, her voice barely audible. You told me I had to drop out of grad school because we couldn't afford it. I was ready to give up my dream because you said money was tight. Was that a lie too? Their silence was all the answer we needed. You didn't just steal money, I said coldly. You stole our security. You stole our independence. And you did it while pretending to care. Don't be so dramatic, Madison, Brenda said sharply. We raised you. We sacrificed so much. This entitlement is exactly why we didn't tell you. My jaw clenched. Entitlement? That was my money. Grandpa gave it to me because I was struggling. And you didn't just withhold it, you lied, and you created a fake illness to justify it. Kevin stood up too. You know what's even worse? You didn't just take the money. You watched us suffer. You let us carry the weight while you enjoyed the comfort. Brenda's voice cracked. We thought we'd get ahead eventually. Your dad's retirement fund took a hit. My school district hasn't raised salaries in years. Spare me, I snapped. You gambled with our futures and lost. And now you want sympathy. I looked at my grandfather. He hadn't said a word since his last question. His eyes were downcast now, quietly ashamed, not of himself, but of them. I'm done, I said, picking up my purse. I need space from this madness. Brenda stood as I walked toward the door. Madison, don't do this. We're your parents. We love you. I turned slowly. Then maybe you should have acted like it. Behind me, I heard Kevin mutter, I'll drive her. But I shook my head. I need to be alone. As I stepped out into the cold night air, I felt something strange. It wasn't just heartbreak. It wasn't just betrayal. It was freedom. The next morning, I didn't answer my phone. Not for Kevin, not for Bella, and especially not for Brenda or Richard. Missed calls stacked up like broken promises, and each one felt heavier than the last. I spent the entire day curled up on my couch, the same couch I had once cried on when my client bookings vanished during the slow season. The same couch I had slept on some nights when I couldn't afford to heat my apartment. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't a call. It was a voicemail from Grandpa William. Madison, sweetheart. When you're ready, I'd like you to come over. No pressure, but there's more you need to know. That evening, I drove to his house in silence, the headlights barely illuminating the questions swirling in my mind. What could be worse than what I already knew? He greeted me with a warm hug and a plate of lemon cookies, my favorite since childhood, and ushered me into his study. On the desk sat a thick folder, neatly organized, labeled in bold letters, "Trust documents and transfers for Madison, Kevin, Bella." "I started digging into old records after last night," he said, removing his reading glasses. "What I found," he shook his head. "It goes deeper than I expected." As I opened the folder, I saw bank statements, transfer records, trust fund contracts, and handwritten notes William had kept over the years. There were pages detailing a trust fund he had set up for me to pay for college, one for Kevin's down payment, and one for Bella's graduate tuition. "Do you remember your student loans?" he asked gently. I nodded. "Of course. I'm still paying them off." "No," he said firmly. "You're not." I blinked. "What?" He pointed to a statement. "The trust fund covered your tuition in full 5 years ago. Your parents told me they were transferring the funds directly to your university." "But I've been sending payments every month," I said slowly, confused. $500 a month to an account they helped me set up for loan repayments." William's jaw tightened. "That account doesn't belong to the loan provider. It belongs to your parents." I stared at the numbers. 3 years of monthly payments, that was $18,000 of my own hard-earned money, quietly disappearing into the same people who had already stolen $180,000. I felt sick. He went on. "Kevin asked for help buying a home. I sent $50,000, but he never received it. They told him the bank denied his application." "And Bella?" William opened another file. 3 years ago, your mother told me Bella had been in a car accident and needed medical funds. I sent $20,000. "There was no accident," I whispered. "No, there wasn't." We sat in silence as the truth settled like dust in the air. For years, my parents had created a financial illusion, not just stealing, but lying, manipulating, and fabricating emergencies to fund their lifestyle. William finally looked up. "This is no longer just betrayal. This is systematic deception." My voice cracked. Did they ever love us? Or were we just assets to manage? He leaned forward and took my hand. "They may have loved you in their way, Madison, but they lost sight of what love means." And in that moment I realized, they didn't just steal my money. They stole my trust, my choices, my past. But they would never steal my future again. 2 days after the meeting with Grandpa William, I met Kevin at a quiet diner on the edge of town. His usual confident posture was gone. He looked tired, hollowed out, like someone who had just come back from a war he didn't know he was fighting. "I confronted Dad," he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. He didn't deny it. He just broke down. "What did he say?" I asked. "That they're drowning," Kevin replied. "Second mortgage. Maxed out credit cards. Personal loans. They've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years, and now Peter's broke." I shook my head. They used us as lifelines. Stole from us while pretending they were struggling right alongside. Later that evening, Bella came to my apartment, red-eyed and carrying a thermos of tea like a peace offering. She looked younger than usual, scared, unsure, shaken. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. 3 years ago, Mom told me Grandpa sent me a birthday gift, but it got lost in the mail. I even called him to say thanks, and he had no idea what I was talking about." I reached out and held her hand. "You weren't stupid. You were lied to." Bella cried quietly, her head resting on my shoulder. I believed her. I believed everything she told me. I almost quit grad school last year because she said we couldn't afford it. But the money was there, wasn't it? "It was," I said. And she took it anyway. That weekend, the 3 of us, me, Kevin, and Bella, met at Grandpa William's house. It was the first time in years we'd been together without Brenda and Richard hovering in the background. "We can't undo what they did," Kevin said. "But we don't have to let it define us." "Agreed," I said. "This ends with us." We made a pact that day. To rebuild our lives on truth. To support one another. And to never let secrecy rule our relationships again. Meanwhile, things at our parents' house were falling apart. Through Kevin, I learned the truth. They had fallen behind on their mortgage. The bank was initiating foreclosure. The SUV was repossessed within 2 weeks. The credit card companies were calling daily. They had no savings left. No backup plan. Just mounting debt and crumbling pride. Brenda had taken a part-time job at a department store, the first job she'd held in nearly 2 decades. Richard was still working in insurance but had recently been demoted due to underperformance. They were barely holding it together, and for the first time, they couldn't fake it anymore. I didn't go see them. I wasn't ready. My wounds were still too raw, my boundaries freshly drawn. But I heard enough through Kevin and Bella to know their world had finally cracked. They had spent years stealing from their children to protect an illusion. And now, the illusion had shattered. But in that wreckage, something unexpected was growing. The bond between me and my siblings. Stronger than ever. Built not on what we had lost, but on what we had finally begun to understand. It took me 3 months before I agreed to meet with them. Not Kevin.
Not Bella.
Not Grandpa William.
Them.
My parents, Brenda and Richard. I chose a neutral location. A quiet coffee shop downtown, the kind where no one asks questions and everyone minds their own business. When I arrived, they were already sitting at a small table near the window. For a moment, I barely recognized them. Brenda's once flawless appearance was gone. Her roots were showing, her blouse hung loose on her frame, and she wore no makeup. Richard looked even worse, hunched over, wrinkled, his once proud posture replaced by sagging shoulders and downcast eyes. "Madison," he said softly as I sat down, his voice cracking. "Thank you for coming. We weren't sure you would." I nodded, but said nothing. I wasn't here to make them feel better. I was here to say what I needed to say. "I'm not here because I've forgiven you," I began, looking them both in the eye. "I'm here because I need closure." Brenda reached across the table, but I pulled my hand back. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to comfort me. Not yet." They both nodded, ashamed. "What you did," I continued, "wasn't just stealing money. It was stealing trust. You watched me struggle while telling me everything would be okay. You lied, you manipulated, and you made me believe I was alone. You made me feel like a failure when I wasn't." Richard looked up. "We made terrible mistakes. We lost control of everything." Brenda added quickly, "We never meant for it to go so far. We just kept hoping we'd find a way to fix it. But we didn't. And we're sorry." I took a breath. "Do you even know how much you took from me? From Kevin? From Bella?" Brenda's eyes welled up. "We do now. And we regret every second of it." "I don't need regret," I said calmly. "I need actions. I need boundaries. And I need you to understand that you no longer get the benefit of blind trust." They were silent, and I let that silence stretch. "Going forward," I continued, "I'm open to limited communication. Texts, occasional calls, birthdays. But I need time. And I need space. You've had your say. Now, let me heal." Richard wiped his eyes and nodded. "That's fair. More than fair." Brenda reached into her purse and handed me a letter. "I wrote this. For you. For later. You don't have to read it now." I took it, not promising anything. As I stood to leave, I looked at them one last time. This isn't reconciliation. It's not a reunion. It's a line in the sand. What happens next depends on you. They didn't try to stop me. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange kind of peace. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness, but the kind that comes from clarity. I hadn't gotten closure from them. I had given it to myself. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of my own makeup studio. A clean, sunlit space with warm wood floors, elegant lighting, and a nameplate on the wall that read, "Madison Claire Beauty." It wasn't huge, but it was mine. Fully mine. I had paid for it with a combination of my own income and a lump sum from Grandpa William, money he calculated as close to what my parents had stolen from me, $180,000 in diverted support, plus $18,000 in fake loan payments. But more than the money, it was his belief in me that had gotten me here. "I don't want you to see this as charity," he had said the day he transferred the funds. "This was always yours. I'm just putting it where it belonged in the first place." With the money, I'd cleared my debt, upgraded my equipment, and hired a part-time assistant. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing clients out of desperation. I was choosing them. I had time to breathe, time to create, time to live. Kevin had used his portion to leave his soul-crushing finance job. He started a consulting firm for small businesses and found joy in helping others succeed. "I actually look forward to Mondays now," he told me over lunch one afternoon, laughing like he hadn't in years. Bella finished her graduate program with flying colors. With Grandpa's help, she even began teaching part-time while exploring creative writing on the side. And perhaps most surprisingly of all, she was dating a tattoo artist. "He makes me feel seen," she said. "Not used. Not controlled." We had created our own version of family, just the three of us and Grandpa William. Every Sunday, we met at his home for lunch, laughter, and healing. One day, he called a meeting and said, "It's time we talk about legacy." He laid out a new financial system, transparent trusts for each grandchild, direct deposits, full visibility. No intermediaries. No room for mismanagement. "The silence around money in this family ends with me," he declared. That year, we held our first family-only legacy dinner, with just the four of us. There were no crystal chandeliers, no fake smiles, and no marble countertops. Just honest conversation, forgiveness in process, and plans for the future. As for Brenda and Richard, they were now living in a modest apartment on the edge of town. Richard was still working, though at a lower position. Brenda, to her credit, had joined a financial support group and was holding down her retail job. They sent messages on holidays, sometimes a card in the mail, and once even a letter saying, "We know it will take years, maybe forever, to rebuild trust. But we're trying." And maybe they were. But I didn't need to rush anything. I had already started a new chapter. That evening, after closing my studio, I stood by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance. My phone buzzed. A message from Bella. "Proud of you. See you Sunday." For the first time in my adult life, I felt whole. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I had taken back control of my life. They had tried to rewrite my story, but I had picked up the pen and finished it on my terms. Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who betray us the deepest. For years, I thought I was simply trying to survive, hustling to keep my business afloat, to make ends meet, to stay hopeful. But the truth was far more painful. I wasn't just struggling. I was being deceived. My own parents, the people who raised me, were secretly stealing from me. They watched me fight, worry, and nearly break, while living comfortably on what was meant to support me. They took my stability. They took my trust. They even tried to take my future. But here's what they couldn't take: my strength, my vision, my voice. I rebuilt everything they tried to dismantle. I found success, not because of them, but in spite of them. And most importantly, I discovered what true family looks like, not perfect, not performative, but real. So, if you're out there, trying to make sense of betrayal, if you've been hurt by the very people who are supposed to protect you, let this be a reminder. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to say no. And you're allowed to start again, wiser, stronger, and fully in control. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of recovery, rebuilding, and reclaiming power. Thank you for listening. And never forget, you're stronger than you think.